Rabbi Jamie Korngold. Rabbi Korngold is an ordained Reform rabbi and founder and executive director of the Adventure Rabbi program, which bases in Boulder and Lake Tahoe. She's nationally recognized for her innovative work combining religion and nature, as well as for her cutting-edge use of technology. Rabbi Korngold is the author of the best-selling book, God in the Wilderness, which is now in its third printing, and The God Upgrade, Finding Your 21st Century Spirituality in Judaism's 5,000-year-old tradition, which was named one of the 10 best religious books of the year by Publishers Weekly. She's also written 6 children's books. Rabbi Korngold has been featured by Good Morning America, USA Today, CBS, CNN, NPR, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Ski, as well as many other outlets. She's also an athlete in addition to a scholar. She completed the Leadville Trail 100, which is a 100-mile running race, and she did it in less than 30 hours. In addition, she was ranked 4th in the nation for telemark mogul skiing. She's a graduate of Cornell University's Natural Resources program and received her master's and ordination from Hebrew Union College. In addition to all of this, Rabbi Korngold has worked as a street musician in Japan, a taxi driver in Alaska, and a cook on board a boat in Alaska helping with the Exxon Valdez oil spill cleanup. She lives in Boulder with her husband and 2 daughters. I'm really excited about our program tonight, so please join me in welcoming Boulder's own adventure Rabbi Jamie Korngold.
So I have to say I find my own bio completely intimidating. Like, I don't want to go up there. Who's that person? So I'm so delighted to have been asked to speak here this evening. I have a bit of the sniffles, so I haven't been shaking people's hands, so it's nothing personal if I don't shake your hands. I just don't want to share. So this is the plan. I have been asked to come here and tell you about my life. So how do you tell someone about your life? So I'm going to jump in right there, and you guys get to think about all the questions you want to know. So I'm going to start here, but if you wanted to know about that, or you wanted to know about that, or really you wanted to know about that, I'm going to take lots of questions, and we can go in whatever direction you want. Are you with me? Is that good? Good plan? Okay, here's where our story is going to start. It is 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We are in Calgary, Canada. If you look out your window in December in Calgary, Canada at 2 o'clock, it's dark. It's really dark. And it's not just dark, but it's cold, because it's pretty far north in Calgary, Canada. And I was a young rabbi. I had recently been ordained 2 years ago. It was 2001. I'm living in Calgary, Canada. I moved there. Anyone want to guess why I would have moved to Calgary, Canada? Sort of. But why did I take that job? Yes, to ski, right? Canada, Western Canada. I'm a skier. I want to go skiing. Who hasn't heard of the legendary powder of Western Canada? So there was a job opening, and I was all over it. So I went up there to ski, and because there was a job, and there was no snow. There was a drought for 3 years. No snow. So it wasn't a happy time. Anyway, so my phone rings. I pick up the phone. It's dark, it's cold, there's no snow. And it's my friend Bernice Lewis. Now, Bernice Lewis and her husband run the outdoor club in Williams College. If you're familiar with Williams College, it's a small, very highly esteemed academic institution in Western Massachusetts. Very small, private, liberal arts college. It's amazing. And she said, Jamie, great news. Our adoption papers have come through. Scott and I are adopting a baby from Romania. She's going to be here in 2 months. will you come with us to the Grand Canyon to do her conversion and her baby naming ceremony? It's like a Jewish baptism. She said, the Grand Canyon is my holy of holies. It's my most holy sacred spot. We're going to take a group of students from the outing club, and we're going to hike down into the canyon. And will you come with us? Will you meet us there? And I looked out that window, and I looked at the thermostat, and I said, yeah, I'll be there. Now, the great thing about being a rabbi is, I mean, you work 6 days a week in a normal position, which I don't have, but so you only get 1 day off a week, but then you get a month vacation. It's pretty good. So I jumped into my pickup truck. I had a red pickup truck at that point, and I loaded it with all my gear, and I drove from Calgary, which is really just north of Salt Lake City, like 2 days, and and I drove back down to the United States. I was thrilled. Actually, I could get NPR. It was really kind of fun, and I drove all the way down to the Grand Canyon, and I met Bernice and Scott and these maybe 15 students and their young daughter, who was just under a year. Her name is Mariah, although I guess she's unnamed at this point because we haven't named her yet. But anyway, so now raise your hand if you're familiar with Williams College. Has anyone heard of Williams? Okay. So those of you that know Williams, you can imagine that many of the students on this trip are Jewish. Not because only Jews do the outing club, which is not the case, but just because if you go to Williams College on the East Coast, there's a high likelihood that you're going to be Jewish, okay? So this trip of 15 kids, maybe 10 of them were Jewish, just coincidence. So we hike down into the canyon, and Scott's carrying this baby on his back, and she's walking a little, and we go all the way down to the canyon. And we do this ceremony. And you gotta imagine us, like we're sitting in this sand on the side of the Colorado River, and there's these huge, huge rocks sticking up in the air, and the canyon is gorgeous, right? It's red and it's tan and all these amazing colors, and there's these plants growing out of the cracks in the rock, and you can't even imagine how are they growing there? There's no water. How do they do that? And so I did this ceremony for this new child in their lives, and I blessed her with the wisdom of our people. May God bless you and keep you. May God's countenance shine upon you and be with you. May God be with you wherever you journey. And may God bless you with the greatest of all blessings, the blessing of peace. And then I added, and I said, may you be given the wisdom of this natural space. May you be like the Colorado River and know which rocks to flow around, which rocks to flow over, and which to patiently wear your way through. May you have the tenacity of those plants growing in the cracks, patiently waiting for rain to arrive, and so on and so forth. And so I combined this deep old tradition with the wisdom of the rocks and the wind. And then Mariah and her mother and her father took a mikveh, a spiritual bath, and immersed themselves in the waters of the Colorado River. And that was her entry to Judaism. That was her mikveh, her entry into Judaism. Now, imagine those 15 kids that are with me. They're 15 college kids. Most of them, if they had a relationship with Judaism, it was like, you know, Judaism is something I did when I was a kid. I used to like it, but what use have I of it now? It was like a sweater maybe you used to love, but then you outgrew, right? But suddenly they saw a Judaism that was interesting, that was engaging, that meant something to them. And so on our week, as we backpacked down in the canyon, they started to ask me questions. And I realized that these students, they knew nothing of the Judaism I knew. They knew nothing of a Judaism that taught an environmental ethic. Because back in 2001, the whole idea of joining Judaism and nature, or religion and nature, honestly hadn't come out yet. It was fringe, it was new. All the big organizations that are doing that were not yet formed. Those are really the years in which they were being formed. All the big ones got formed just around them. So they didn't know of Judaism as an environmental ethic. They didn't know that so many of the lessons that, for me, were just obvious were really Jewish. And so we spent the week down there in the canyon, and they started to ask me questions. And I answered their questions, and they started to call me the adventure rabbi. So I should explain that they called me the adventure rabbi like a cartoon character, right? Like, oh, this is a really hard river for us to get across. That's a job for the adventure rabbi. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. You know, oh, that's a really hard rock face to get over. That's a job for the adventure rabbi. It was a joke. And in a little bit, I'll tell you what it means today to be the adventure rabbi. But that's how it began. It began as a joke. And I left the canyon, and I had that 3-day drive to go back to Calgary. And what I realized is that in America and Canada, actually I should just say it's in the US because I'm not sure about Canada, 40% of the Jews in America are affiliated with congregations. 40%. That means 60% are not. 60% are not finding a spiritual leader who's speaking to them. They're not finding an institution that works for them. And I came back with this idea to say, well, how can I take this thing that I learned down in the canyon, and how can I make it a full-time way of being a rabbi? So I moved down to, I went back to Canada. I gave in my resignation, and that was in March of 2001, and in November, I moved down here to Boulder, and I started the Adventure Rabbi program. So that was in 2001. So it's 2014, which means 13 years have gone by, and the Adventure Rabbi program is now celebrating our bar mitzvah year. We're hoping to get lots of cross pens and calculators. So let me tell you what it means to be the Adventure Rabbi today. So I'm called the Adventure Rabbi because I explore the frontiers of religion. I explore the frontiers of religion. So sometimes it is a physical adventure like it was in the Grand Canyon. So for example, Passover is coming up, and I will have, last year we had 333 people. Andy, you've been with us, right? We had 333 people down in Moab, Utah, and we have a big campground down by the banks of the Colorado River, and we all hike up, all of us, 300 of us, we hike up to this huge arch, and we celebrate Passover in the desert to see how does being outside, how does having this physical adventure change the experience. Sometimes it's an intellectual adventure. So as was mentioned in the introduction, I just had my 9th book come out last week. It's very exciting. But my 2nd book was really controversial. It's called The God Upgrade. We call it the hate mail book because of the quantity of hate mail I got from it. If you want to ask me later why I switched to children's books. Anyway, so The God Upgrade asks really difficult questions about what is God? And is it possible to understand God in a way that's compatible with the world as we experience it? And it's very controversial because a lot of people don't like that idea that you can ask, well, what is God? Because they say it's a word, you can't change what it means. And we can talk more about that if you want. So sometimes it's an intellectual adventure, and sometimes it's an institutional adventure. So my group has really been on the cutting edge of asking questions. What does it mean to be a synagogue? What does it mean to be a congregation? And we were one of the first in the country to go to a dues structure that was not a percent of your income or a set price, but pay at the door. You want to come to Shabbat services? That's $10. Can't do that. How are you get Shabbat? How are you going to charge people? Oh, I have a Square reader. I'm going to run their credit card. Oh my God. So we can talk more about that if you want. But you see more and more of that happening in religion in America as the leaders of religion are coming to terms with the fact that it has to be financially sustainable. If it's not financially viable, it's not going to work. You can no longer count on big donors. You can't count on people saying, it's my obligation, I have to join. You have to make it a quality product that they will be willing to pay for. Well, people don't like hearing any of that stuff, but it works. Another institutional adventure. I don't know why I'm telling you, but you seem so interested. Another institutional adventure. So we have one of the biggest things that we do, that we thrive on, is we have this really amazing bar and bat mitzvah program. And we have students all over the world that study with us. We have students here in person that study with us, and then we have students all over the world that study with us over Skype. We have students in Australia, we've had students in Baghdad, Bangkok, all over the place. And we really looked at, what does it mean to be a bar and bat mitzvah? Like, is it enough to just learn some Hebrew and be able to lead a service? No, it's not. And is the person really becoming a man? Today I'm a man. Tomorrow I go back to 8th grade? Right, they're not becoming a man, but they are becoming a teenager. So we said, well, what do our teenagers need to know to get through those turbulent teenage years, and how can Judaism help them with that? So we teach our bar and bar mitzvah students to be compassionate, to be courageous, to be confident. And how do we teach it? It's not enough to learn your Aleph Bet. We make them climb a peak in Rocky Mountain National Park so they can learn about responsibility. Because I'll tell you, if you pack the wrong socks in your hiking boots, you get the idea of consequences for your actions. And they have to learn to take care of their classmates. They have to learn to be kind to the other people on the trail. They have to learn to not step on the plants. So we go back to, what's the intention behind this institution of bar and bat mitzvah? And how can we best explore it? So the adventure rabbi, 3 kinds of adventure: physical adventure, intellectual adventure, and institutional adventure. Okay, now I have 6 different directions I can go in. So where do you want me to go? Which direction? Say, no, you ask me a question. We'll go wherever you want me to go. Please.
Talk a little bit about the God upgrade.
The God upgrade. Okay. Yeah. No, let me talk. I'm just going to talk about my books in general. Is that good? You good with that? Okay. So here's the story. Who works out at Flatirons Athletic Club? Anyone? Not man? No. Oh, because it doesn't exist anymore. It's now CAC. We see each other every morning there. We're buddies from there. Okay. So here's what happened. It's was like 2002 or something. I should back up a little bit, because okay, here's what happens. I'm in the athletic club, and I'm checking, I guess it was probably a BlackBerry back then, right? And there was an email message from somebody that said, "Hi, my name is Carol Susan Roth. I'm a literary agent. I just saw an article about you in USA Today. I was thinking that I'd like to represent you. Would you like to write a book?" I thought it was spam. Seriously, you do not get emails like that. Like, finding a literary agent is just like, the manna from heaven. So what happened is that I had the good fortune to have a good story. It's just a good story. I started leading services up at Copper, and I started, doing all these different activities, and it was a good story. So I ended up being in the media a lot. And a sad thing to tell you about the publishing world is that what they care the most about is that you're in the press a lot. Because if you can't write, they'll hire a ghostwriter. So I get this phone call, I get this email from Carol Susan Roth, and I called her back immediately. I was about to go to Grand Junction to lead high holiday services, and it wasn't spam. She really meant it. She's like, I think you've got a great story to tell, and I want to help you, and I want to help you do this. So we spent about 2 years together. She had to teach me how to write a proposal. You don't, when you're doing nonfiction, you don't actually write a book. You write a proposal. And then the proposal gets bought by the publishing house. So we wrote this proposal, and she shopped it around to 18 different publishing houses, and then she did an auction. And then Doubleday, who is a division of Random House, they had me come out for the day. I got on that JetBlue flight, that leaves like in the middle of the night, and I went out there and I met with the publisher and the editor, and they said, okay, we want to do a book of yours, but not this one. We don't like your proposal, but we want to do a book of yours. So you write us a different proposal. Okay. So I wrote my first book, God in the Wilderness. And it was right before massive changes happened in the publishing world. And it was a beautiful experience. It was when the publishers would still send a car to pick you up and take you places. And I went on this big book tour, and they arranged everything. And it's not like that anymore. It was just an amazing experience. And the book did really well. And it was so well received by people because they said things like, I really didn't think there was room in religion for me. And now I see there is. And the book is written very specifically to appeal to a Jewish and Christian audience. It's actually not a specifically Jewish book, and that's because of the publisher, Doubleday. That's how they wanted it done. But so I spoke in a lot of church groups, I spoke in a lot of synagogues, I spoke all over the place, and people felt that they were being welcomed back into religion. People who said, I have my most spiritual experiences outside, and now I see there really is room in religion for me. And it taught all kinds of lessons that I really feel maybe you can get best outside. Like, don't try to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. Even God's not perfect if you believe in God. Nature's not perfect. Or stop trying to get the most out of every day. Told stories like that. And anyway, so people loved this book. And then what happened is they got all jazzed to go back into their religion, and they walked in to their church or their synagogue, and there was the pastor or the rabbi, and let's say it was me, and I was up there saying, Misha berech avotenu v'imotenu. May the one who blessed our ancestors bless Harry Schwartz, who is suffering from cancer. May he find complete healing, and so on and so forth. And they got up and they left because they said, wait a second, Jamie, you told me that my religion had gotten the upgrades. You told me that things had changed, but I walked into my synagogue and my rabbi is still praying to God to fix somebody's uncle. And I don't think that God is going to fix that person's uncle. I think that doctors are going to fix the uncle. And I don't want to hear that superstitious gobbledygook. And I realized that rabbi standing up there may or may not really believe that the rabbi is praying to God and God's going to fix the uncle. And the people sitting there may or may not believe that. Some of them do, and some of them don't. But the assumption to the person that doesn't know what's going on in the room is that everyone there believes exactly the same thing. And that's really alienating to the person who doesn't share that belief. Does that make sense? So that's why I wrote the second book. For that person. I didn't write it for the people that are comfortable in their religious belief and have something that totally works for them. I wrote it for the person that when they hear someone talk about God, they say, I am so out of here. That has nothing to do with me. Because the truth is that in Judaism, there isn't one definition of God. If you look in our sacred books, and if you look through time, our definition of what God is has changed drastically. In the beginning, in the very beginning of the Bible and the Torah, it's not even monotheistic. It's monolatry. So we have our God, and the other people have their God, and we go to war. It's our God against their God. We have a great prayer called Mi Chamocha, and it says, who is the greatest amongst the gods? And then that changes. And then monotheism gets adopted. And it keeps on changing. In the beginning, God's like this therapist. You know, God's like, hey, Abraham, you have been living at home long enough. You know what? It is time for you to get up and go. And don't worry about anything. I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to make your offspring as numerous as the stars. I mean, wouldn't it be great to have somebody like that, you know, in your life? And later, God doesn't do that anymore. God stops having these personal relationships, and God's the king because we've become a nation and we need a king, right? And throughout time, throughout history, what God is to people changes as we begin to learn more and more and more about the world. So there's a great Jewish thinker called Spinoza, and he didn't believe that there's a God that you can pray to and make things happen. But he believed that if you went out in nature and you had that sense of oneness, of just like, I am part of something bigger than myself, I am part of all this, that is God. There's another great Jewish thinker named Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he believed that God is in relationships. So Miriam, you were talking to me earlier about the special relationship you have with animals. Many people have that really unique relationship where someone accepts you completely for who you are with an animal. And Heschel would say, whether it was a person or an animal or a piece of mica, that relationship is God. Now that's, again, not something you can pray to, but it's something you can experience. So what I did in the book is I laid out all these different concepts of God, and then I challenged people. I said, look, no one can tell you what is right. That's up to you. You need to figure out what is right for you. You have the responsibility to come up with a concept that is compatible with the world as you experience it. And when we're trying to speak in a language that's inclusive, we may be using this word God, and it may mean completely different things to each of us. And that's okay. I have this really big keynote address coming up in Seattle at the end of the month. And they asked me to come months ago. And this is a big fundraiser. And not for me. I'm talking and they're raising the funds. But anyway, so I got this email last week from the person in charge, and she said, we're really concerned because the Orthodox community we're concerned they're going to find your talk controversial. So we'd like you to not talk about... And my agent called them up and said, listen, you hired Rabbi Korngold to come speak. You know what she speaks about. You have her books. You can see her videos. You know who she is. She is not changing her message. If you don't want to hear the message, that's fine. You can have your money back. But she's not changing her message. And what I would say to the people in Seattle is this. This is the really amazing thing about being Jewish. Now, if you believe that the center of Christianity, and some people do and some people don't, but if you believe the center of Christianity is faith in Jesus, that's a belief. And if somebody believes in Jesus, they are in. And if somebody does not believe in Jesus, they are out. That's pretty clear. That's a belief. You have it or you don't have it. Judaism is not a faith. Judaism is a family. We are the offspring of Abraham and Sarah, which means we can believe vastly different things and still be part of the family. Judaism is more like your Thanksgiving table, where this one is gluten-free, and this one is lactose intolerant, and this one does not eat meat, but you can still all be at the table. Yeah? So the glorious thing, one of the many glorious things about Judaism is we don't all agree, and that's fine. There's room for all of us. So that's the story of the God upgrade. Where do you want to go next? Please. Yeah, that's a great question. So I was raised in New York. We have large coffees, cost a quarter, around the quarter. And I'm trying to raise my kids here in Boulder to have a little New York-ish. So you can imagine my pride. One day we were sitting in Abo's in South Boulder, and we're in one of those little booths. And Ori, my little one, she's 7 now. I think she was 3 at the time. She came running over. She said, Mommy, the people in that booth are from New York. Do you know why? They had their pizza folded, like we do in New York. They were eating it properly. Anyway, so I was raised in New York, outside of the city in Westchester County. And I was raised in a religious family. And what do I mean by that? So we were not Orthodox. We were not halachically observant, which means we didn't keep all the rules. But religion was a main part of my family's life. So we operated on a Jewish calendar. So what did that look like? So my mom was the president of the synagogue board. My dad tutored the bar and bat mitzvah students. My mom also taught in the religious school. We lived our lives on a Jewish calendar. So Friday night, I could go out with my friends, but not until after Shabbos dinner. And they were welcome to come. We might have 4, 10, 15 people coming to dinner. And then we could all go out. So Judaism was always a really important mainstay of my identity and who I was in the world. And I would say that my twin passions growing up were Judaism and the outdoors. And they were very, very separate. It wasn't until later that I learned to integrate the two of them. Please. Yeah, so a lot of the things that my congregation does is take our observance outside. So in the summer, once a month, we run a hike where we'll go on a hike, and along the way, I'll do different teachings. So I'll introduce something, and then the wonderful thing about hiking versus learning inside is that people have time to process whatever it is I've taught. So I teach it, we walk, and then I can ask a question, and they will have time to process it, and then we get to the next spot, and we've talked about it more. Part of the there's many, but there's 2 amazing things I want to mention that happen when you take religion outdoors. So the first is a vocabulary piece. So the prayer books are filled with lots of things like awe. I'm trying to think of other words, but I don't know. My mind's blanking right now. But lots of words that they don't mean anything to us. Right? They're just empty words. But when you go outside, let's just go with awe, because that's a great one. When you go outside and you're standing on top of the Flatirons and you're watching those birds catching the thermals and you're looking down at these trees that you know that were planted by the people who came here before us, and how did they make this whole place green and how amazing it is, and you understand awe. Like, you know, those rocks that jut up to heaven, maybe higher. You know, no one has to define it for you. You know what it means. And then if you pray a prayer from your tradition, like in Judaism, it's Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The feeling that you're having out there of being connected to something greater than yours has become a springboard for that prayer. It makes that prayer suddenly filled with meaning for you. And then if you go back inside, the echo of that experience follows you. And you find that this prayer that maybe you've said inside for 40 years and it was meaningless to you, when you were outside, you finally got that vocabulary of what it is supposed to feel like. So that's the first piece, is the vocabulary piece. The second piece is the community piece. Now, I don't know about many other religions, but I do know for certain that most people come to Judaism because they want relationships. They come for connection. And it is really definitely very possible and rewarding, but also difficult to create community inside. So the synagogue at which I used to work did this really beautiful thing. If when you walked in the front door to services, someone would say, "Welcome, Shabbat Shalom," and they'd shake your hand, and then you walk inside and you sit down for an hour and a half, and the rabbi talks and the cantor sings and you sit there. And then you're supposed to go to what we call an oneg, which is where we share some food, hopefully as good as this delicious food we've had tonight. And now you're supposed to talk to people. It's very awkward for me. For gregarious people, it's not awkward. For me, I hate it. I just I can't figure out what to say. I want to run away and hide. However, when you're hiking, there you are, you're hiking up this trail, and there's this really hard thing you have to climb up. And the person in front of you says, "Can I offer you a hand?" Same hand that they offered you when you walk into the sanctuary, Shabbat Shalom, except now they said, can I help you up this? And you take their hand because you sincerely needed their hand. It's not a fabricated holding of hands. I had a trip one time where this guy came up to me and he said, "I have to tell you about the most amazing moment of this entire retreat." He's like, I'm an Ironman triathlete, which was pretty obvious looking at him, actually. I could have guessed he was an Ironman triathlete, but he's a totally buff guy. And he said, and I've hiked on these trails for years. And we were heading up there, and he said, this young woman from New York, he spoke to her later, this woman from New York, she looks like she hasn't been out of high heels 5 minutes in her life. I could bench press her with one hand in my sleep. This woman was so small. I'm going up there, and she offered me a hand. And he said, and I took that hand. And he said, no one's ever offered me a hand. No one ever offers me a hand. He said, that was the most moving moment. And that's what you can create outside because it's organic, it's real. That's really, really hard to create indoors. What else?
So what do you do about people who aren't outdoors people and aren't athletic and maybe can't climb that trail but are interested in this conceptual framework?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually not everything we do is a rugged outdoor trip. I was actually meeting with someone today who's a member of my congregation, and she has thankfully survived cancer, and she's like, I really want to come skiing, but could I just sit in the lodge? I said, why don't you we have an indoor Shabbat services once a month. Why don't you just come to that? She's like, oh yeah, I could do that. So we do offer a plethora of different activities, and they're not all hardcore. And even, for example, we do this Rosh Hashanah retreat. And my parents are 80 and 84. My mom has Alzheimer's. So we all go on this big hike out to a lake. They don't do the hike. Someone brings them in a little golf cart, and they meet us, and they do that part. So it's not everybody that can do everything, and that's fine. Our religious school meets in a elementary school. They're not outside every time, which is why I started out by saying sometimes it's a physical adventure, sometimes it's an intellectual adventure. It's about exploring the frontier, and that's not always physical. Please. Oh, that's great. Actually, I wrote my senior thesis at rabbinical school on Judaism and nature. So, very boring title. I realized in school that the really boring thesis, what's it, thesi? Whatever. Anyway, the plural theses, the really boring ones had these amazing titles. And the ones that were a little more accessible had boring titles like Judaism and nature. So I wrote my senior thesis on it. And that's where so I did a year doing really pretty intensive research. And that actually, it was probably the most peaceful time in my life. It was when I was training for Leadville. So I would read like these texts for 6 hours a day, and then I'd run 6 hours a day. And people would actually come up to me and say, "You are the most peaceful person I've ever met." It was amazing. I mean, what a lifestyle, huh? But anyway, so that's when I did my real research into it, and that's actually what ultimately became God in the Wilderness. But my first introduction, I think, was thanks to Rabbi Mike Cummins, who runs an organization called Torah Trek. And when I was living in Israel in 1993, Mike was either just ordained or about to be ordained, and he started a group called Ruach HaMidbar, which means spirit of the wilderness. And he took a bunch of rabbinical students and our friend, actually I was the only rabbinical student. He took a bunch of people out into Mitzpeh Ramon, which is an amazing region in Israel, and where actually I run trips today in that same area. And it was the first time I'd actually experienced someone actually praying outside and studying outside. And that's what planted the seed. And he also was really, he moved to the States about the same time that I started my program. So we kind of started our programs together, which was really a beautiful experience. Does that answer your question? And in school, we would take turns leading services, and so I would always make everyone go outside. And the chancellor, he called me the pagan. I was the pagan, and I was trying to explain to him why it wasn't paganism, because it's not. It's actually different. You know, I just came back from a trip to Israel. I'm taking a group there in Thanksgiving, so I went there to do some scouting, and I had a bar mitzvah by the Western Wall, and for those of you that keep up with Israeli news, there has been a lot of conflict at the Western Wall, which is one of our holiest places, about women praying at the wall. And so they've built this new, beautiful area where women and men can pray side by side. So I've done lots of bar mitzvahs there, but this was my first at the new area, and it was lovely. And then I went down south to scout for this trip in November. And I have to tell you the most amazing thing I saw. It was so incredible. I should have brought you a picture of this, but it was really incredible. We were hiking, and we weren't on trails. We were just traveling through the wilderness. And we came on this saddle, right? The saddle of a ridge. And we're way up there. I mean, like, you could just see forever. And there was this one rock. And it's about the size of that. And it's upright. And none of the other rocks are upright. And it's got lichen on it. And none of the other rocks have lichen on it. I'll tell you, this is how big the rock was. Imagine you are Jacob. Okay, you're biblical Jacob. And you and your brother Esau you just stole all his stuff. And so your mom's like, I think you should leave for a little bit, like the rest of your life. And so you take off and you're traveling through the desert, and it's time to go to sleep. And the desert is a very cold place. So you're lying down to go to sleep. You lie on your back. It's very cold, a lot of surface area on your back. You lie on your front. It's very cold, lots of surface area on your front. So you decide to sleep on your side. Now, what's the problem with sleeping on your side on the ground? No pillow. So anyone know what Jacob does for a pillow? He takes a rock. Exactly. He takes a rock and he puts it beneath his head. So that is the size of the rock I'm looking at. It's about just big enough to fit under a man's head, except it's upright. And it's covered with lichen. And I'm trying to figure out why on earth is this rock covered with lichen. And we're hiking a little more, and we get to another top of a mountain. And same thing. One rock, size of a pillow, upright, lichen growing on it. Well, I happened to be hiking with an expert. His name is Yoash Limon, and he guides all our trips in Israel. And I said, what's up with the rocks? And he said, here's what it is. Do you know in the Bible where it says, Jacob put the rock under his head, and then he slept, and then he had a dream, and there was a ladder, and there were angels coming up and down, and when he woke, he said, behold, God is in this place, and I did not know it. And he took a rock, and he set it upright, and then he poured upon it oil to mark that this was a place of God. Later in the Bible, it says that when the Jewish people get to the land of Israel, they should no longer pray on top of mountaintops, as the pagans do, as their neighbors do. Because the leaders of the Jewish people were scared that the Jewish ways and the pagan ways would become confused, and the Jews would adopt the other ways. And I've always wondered, well, but what did that look like? What did it look like that they were doing that we weren't supposed to assimilate into? And that rock up there, the reason it is lichen growing on it is because that was a sacred place to people for years and years and years and centuries, and they poured oil on that rock, and they poured wine on the rock, and they poured milk, and they poured water, whatever they poured in sacrifice on that rock to mark that this was a place where God dwells, changes the chemistry structure enough for lichen to grow. And when you stand in that place, whether you're Jewish or you're not Jewish, you understand why someone felt that was a sacred spot. You have that feeling of being connected to something larger than yourself, of the trees, of the breeze, of the rocks, of the flowers, of whatever it is that you can see in that place. And sometimes it's really just a view and rocks. And you have that feeling of connection. And you understand why people felt that that was a sacred spot to be marked. So, an amazing experience in Israel to be able to walk up to one of these high places and really understand what someone experienced. You guys ask great questions. What else? How are we on time? Oh, we don't have that much more. Okay.
How old were you and realized you wanted to become a rabbi?
That's a great question. So when I was a little kid, we used to play rabbi. There were 5 kids. My sister was the oldest, KT, and then our friend Michelle came next, and then there was Karen and Debbie, and then I was the youngest. And I always had to be the congregation. Because KT got to be the rabbi, and Michelle got to be the cantor, and Karen got to be the bat mitzvah student, and Debbie and I, we were always the congregation. So my rabbi growing up, Rabbi Peter Rubenstein, in my reference letter to HUC, they ask, why do you think the student wants to be a rabbi? He told that story. He said, I'm pretty sure that's it. So I had a very like this path. I studied environmental, natural resources, forestry in college, and then I became an outdoor guide. I guided for Outward Bound, I guided for Woods Women, I skied, I was on the Telemark bump tour, and really got into that part of my life. And then what happened is one year I was living in Vail, and I had this feeling that I'd left my brain in storage. I just felt like I hadn't really used it in a while, and I really wanted to. And I was trying to figure out what should I do? What should be my next step? And in Vail, there's an amazing congregation called B'nai Vail. And they didn't have a rabbi. They would bring rabbis up from Denver, but we would all kind of take turns leading the services. And I just did it more than the next person. They called me their unofficial cantor. So whoever was going to be leading the service would work with me, and I'd help them lead the service. And the board just came to me one day, and they said, "Why don't you go to rabbinical school and be our rabbi?" And I thought, interesting idea. And so I went and I shadowed one of my childhood rabbis. I shadowed Rabbi Sandy Reagans. And fortunately, I guess, what I thought rabbis do is really not what they do at all. I thought rabbis like got to write and get to speak and get to work with people, and they get to do that a little, but not really as much as I thought they did. Anyway, so I applied for rabbinical school, and I got in. And the funny thing about getting into rabbinical school was that, I did all these things. You heard about them. I drove a taxi, and I, whatever, all these funny things I did. And then my parents used to play this funny game where they would say, okay, try to think of something Jamie did, and now we're going to say how it prepared her to be a rabbi. Yeah, so driving a taxi cab, I mean, that's obvious. Anyone know what that one is? Right, you counsel people when you drive a taxi cab. They tell you all their problems, and you counsel them. So they used to go through everything, and it was kind of they felt like finally everything was coming together. And I really do feel, I have to say, that I feel like everything I did trained me for this very unique rabbinate that I have. All those different pieces. I'm really fortunate to have collected all these different tools. I have a very unique tool set. Please. Love. So I'm so glad you asked, because now I can tell you. So I was living in Canada, as I said, and I was trying to decide where to move to in the States. I wanted to come back to the States. I wanted to be in America. When I was in Canada, I was the 7th female rabbi in the country. And you know how they say the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers get the land? Yeah, it's really true, and I wanted the land. I had enough of arrows. So I was coming back to the States where I wouldn't be quite as radical. And I was actually trying to decide between Salt Lake City and Boulder, because I'd lived in both of those places. And I had a friend. His name is Jeff Finkelstein, and he lived in Boulder. And so I called him up. I was curious what the dating scene was like in Boulder, Colorado for a young Jewish woman. And he called me back, and then he called me back, and then he called me back for an entire month until I moved here. So I moved here for love. So we're married. We have 2 kids. And he owns a web development firm called Customer Paradigm. But he really helps me with the Adventure Rabbi program also. And our 2 kids are Sadie and Ori. And they are featured in my children's books. So, yeah. Please.
Earlier you said, if I heard you correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, that it has to be sustainable, financially sustainable, and you refer to it as a requirement. I found it to be very difficult. How do you reconcile that with the relationship with God, whatever that God might be, a microstone or a weed or a plant?
I think it's reality, right? I mean, I just told you that I have 2 kids, and they want to go to college, and they're going to need braces, and I need to feed them. And if you want me to be your spiritual leader and devote my time to your spiritual life, you need to pay me to do that. That's just the reality of it. And that is like, but when you think about it, I had a person that came to me and she's like, I don't understand why you charge for high holidays. It should be free. My old synagogue, it was free. And I said, it wasn't free. Somebody else was paying for it. Someone has to pay the mortgage on this room. This is a free event. Is it a free event? No, it's not a free event. This is a $10 event? Whatever, it's a $10 event, right? The $12. The food was donated. The wine was donated. We saved money on the heat. But the lights are on, and there's a mortgage. And so, the reality is it's just reality. It's just reality. Miriam, and then right here.
really have a question for you. In common, I always felt that going to synagogues was boring. Born and raised Jewish, kosher parents, kosher mother. And the way I find God is out in the natural world, hugging my horse, looking at the mountains, looking at snow, taking care of horses and donkeys, being hit in the head with an eagle, by an eagle,
So the biggest compliment I always get is after my services, and it might be inside or it might be outside, is, I never counted the ceiling tiles even once. Did you have a question also?
I wanted to know if you have non-Jewish people wanting to come and hear you, or if you have been asked to come to some of the Christian churches and tell them about how you do your service.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I have, especially after my first book came out. My second book was more Jewish-oriented, and that was because the publisher was a Jewish publisher, and that's what they wanted. I actually fought them on that, but I lost. So after my first book, I actually did a lot, probably more talks in churches, actually, than synagogues. And I have done things like Eckerd College had me come in and train 3 of their ministers to do this kind of work. So some of the language, I mean, some of our books are even shared, you know, so sometimes I don't know the correct vocabulary, but the way that I do things is very adaptable. What time am I finishing here? Do I have like 5 minutes still, or? Okay. Yeah, please. So our offices are in South Boulder and Manhattan Circle. And then we rent a religious school. We have a space in there that can sit like maybe 60 people. And then we rent a religious school. We rent Bear Creek Elementary School for a religious school. So, which is a great way to use a space that's already, you know, a public space. Yeah.
Do you have any idea, now this is probably not a really good question, but I'm very upset with what's happened in France recently. And I just want to know from your perspective, what you counsel people to do and
I think for me, the most upsetting thing about the situation in France is that when the same type of terrorists went into a synagogue in Israel and killed Jews praying, there was no national outcry. The Jews were blamed for it. So
where were they blamed? You mean all over the world?
yeah, in the press, they blamed, the Jews were blamed. So I think it's a frightening time for Jewish people in France. I think it's a frightening time for Jewish people in Europe. And I think we are going to see more and more. I mean, the Jewish community is starting to leave France. And maybe it's time. Yeah. I'd love to talk about my children's books. So I switched to writing children's books, and I've had I have 9 books, so 7. I've had 7 children's books come out. I write them for Carbon Publishing, which is part of an imprint of Learner. And the one thing that all my children's books have in common is actually the same lesson I'm trying to teach adults, is that you have the responsibility to make your religion your own. So whether it's Sadie's Lag BaOmer mystery, in which Sadie and Ori cannot figure out what Lag BaOmer is, and nobody knows, because nobody knows, and they have to figure out what it is, and they do, you know, or if Sadie's sukkah breakfast, in which Sadie and Ori want to go have breakfast in the sukkah, but you're not supposed to go out there unless you have guests, and it's too early to wake up mom and dad. Moral of the story, don't wake up mom and dad when they're asleep. And so they rally all their stuffed animals to be their guests. They're all, you know, they're making Judaism accessible and meaningful to little kids. And I really, I've tackled most of the more minor holidays first. I have one coming out this year that's a little heart-wrenching, but in it, it's really, I'm really excited about this book. As I mentioned before, my mom has just entered Alzheimer's, and I called up my editor about 2 years ago, and I said, I need a book. My mom's entering dementia. I need a book for my kids, and she said, you know what, there's really nothing good out there. Try this one, but so you tell an author there's nothing good out there. So I wrote it. So in this book, Sadie and Ori experience a very vibrant grandmother who rides them on their bicycles and teaches them how to throw a baseball. And then as Ori and Sadie can do more and more, Grandma can do less and less until Grandma is sitting in a chair and Ori screams in rage. You know, what's happening to my grandma? I want my grandma to do what she used to be able to. And there's just this heart-wrenching moment of everyone realizing, like, and then Sadie realizing that it's her turn. It's her turn to take care of her grandmother. And so Sadie and Ori go to the chair, the rocking chair that their grandmother rocked them in as babies. And they squeeze in beside her, and they read Grandma's story. So the children are, in the end, empowered to take care of the grandmother. So that should be out sometime this year. So my time is just about up. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Korngold. Boy, I think we could listen to you all night, actually. It was so delightful and so fun to hear your story. Thanks to all of you for coming tonight. Please join us in a little over a month on Wednesday, February 18th, when Dorothy Rupert, who is sitting right here, will be our extraordinary speaker on that evening. So please come back to hear Dorothy. Once again, I want to thank our sponsors, Flatirons Bank, Tebow Properties, the Hotel Boulderado, BJ's for the wonderful food, and Hazel's for the wine that we had tonight. So have a safe drive home, and hope to see you again in February. Thank you.